Attention, you are about to hear one of the most surprising stories of the Second World War, a gripping account based on documents, field reports, and testimony from those who lived it. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. If you enjoy historical documentaries like this one, please subscribe to our channel. Now, turn up your volume and join us as we investigate this remarkable chapter of military history. The summer of 1942 marked a turning point for the United States Marine Corps. For the first time in its 166-year history, African-American recruits would don the uniform of the elite fighting force. The decision came not from any moral awakening about equality, but from the desperate need for manpower following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Relegated to segregated training at Montford Point, North Carolina, these men would face prejudice from their own countrymen, while preparing to face a determined enemy across the Pacific. The first Black Marines arrived at Camp Montford Point on August 26, 1942. Among them was Private First Class Raymond Jefferson Davis, a 23-year-old from Philadelphia with a college education and quiet determination. His commanding officer, Captain Samuel Woods, a white Southerner with little patience for integration, made it clear during their first assembly, "The Marine Corps didn't ask for you people. You're here because the President decided you should be. I don't know if you'll make good Marines. I don't think you will." Alongside Davis was Private Marcus Wilkinson, a tall, athletic 19-year-old from Chicago who had dreamed of military service since childhood. There was also Corporal Isaiah Montgomery, 26, a former railroad worker from Mississippi with natural leadership abilities that even white officers reluctantly acknowledged. These men and thousands like them would form ammunition and depot companies, designated for support roles rather than combat units, as military leadership didn't believe Black Marines should serve in frontline positions. The segregated units trained separately, slept in separate barracks, and ate in separate mess halls. When they ventured into nearby Jacksonville, they faced brutal discrimination, barred from restaurants, theaters, and public transportation, except in designated colored sections. Military police often arrested Black Marines for minor infractions while ignoring similar behavior from white servicemen. Despite this treatment, most Montford Point Marines maintained extraordinary discipline, determined to prove themselves worthy of the uniform they wore. By 1943, word began filtering back from the Pacific Theater. The fighting against Japanese forces was growing more desperate by the month. The Marine Corps had suffered heavy casualties on Guadalcanal, and the island-hopping campaign would require thousands more men. Captain Woods received orders to prepare the 8th Ammunition Company and 11th Depot Company for deployment. As they packed their sea bags, rumors circulated about what awaited them in the Pacific. Some had heard that Japanese propaganda targeted Black troops specifically, telling them they had no stake in the white man's war. Others whispered about Japanese soldiers who had been instructed to single out Black Marines for especially brutal treatment. On January 15, 1944, 600 Black Marines boarded the USS Middleton at San Diego, bound for the Marshall Islands. The crossing was miserable, overcrowded conditions below deck, where temperatures often exceeded 100 degrees, with Black Marines assigned the worst accommodations on the transport. The men spent their days cleaning weapons, studying Japanese military tactics, and listening to officers describe the fanatical devotion of the enemy they would soon face. Lieutenant James Whitfield, one of the few white officers who treated his Black Marines with respect, gathered his platoon from the 8th Ammunition Company on the ship's deck. "The Japanese think they're fighting a race war," he explained. "Their propaganda says Americans are weak because we're diverse. They believe their racial purity makes them superior. When we land, they'll try to prove that. Don't give them the satisfaction." 2 weeks into their Pacific deployment, the first evidence of Japanese attitudes surfaced. A Marine patrol discovered abandoned Japanese positions containing propaganda leaflets printed in English. To the Negro American soldier, one read, "Why fight for a nation that lynches your people? In Japan, there is no color barrier. Surrender and be treated with honor." Another showed crude caricatures of black Marines being mistreated by white officers. The Japanese psychological operations assumed racial divisions would create an exploitable weakness among American forces. The Japanese miscalculation became evident during the Battle of Saipan in June of 1944. The 3rd Ammunition Company came under intense fire while delivering supplies to frontline units. When Japanese forces launched a night attack that threatened to cut off a company of white Marines, Sergeant Montgomery and 12 men from his ammunition unit took up defensive positions with rifles and carbines, weapons they weren't expected to use in combat. For 3 hours, they held back repeated assaults, allowing the trapped company to withdraw safely. After the battle, a captured Japanese lieutenant expressed surprise during interrogation. Through a translator, he admitted their intelligence had suggested that black American troops would break under pressure or potentially even refuse to fight. The reality had proven devastatingly different. "Your colored Marines fought like demons," the translator related from the prisoner's statement. "We were told they would run." News of this exchange spread quickly through Marine units on Saipan. For the Montford Point Marines, it represented validation of what they had always known. Given the opportunity, they would prove themselves every bit as capable as their white counterparts. For many white Marines who had harbored doubts about fighting alongside black troops, it began a reluctant re-evaluation of preconceptions. By early 1945, the Pacific War had reached its bloodiest phase. The Battle of Iwo Jima, beginning on February 19th, would bring 800 black Marines to one of the most brutal battlefields of the war. Private Davis, now a seasoned veteran with the 36th Depot Company, landed on the second day of the invasion. Their assignment was to move ammunition from the beach to frontline units and evacuate wounded Marines back to aid stations. What was supposed to be a support role quickly transformed into direct combat when Japanese forces emerged from hidden bunkers behind the American lines. Cut off from their assigned unit, Davis and 14 other black Marines took refuge in a shallow ravine. For 23 hours, they fought against repeated Japanese attacks using captured enemy weapons when their ammunition ran low. Captain Thomas Welch, a white Marine officer who had once opposed black Marines serving in any capacity, witnessed their defense. In his after-action report, he wrote, "The men of the 36th conducted themselves with valor that would credit any Marine of any color. They held their position despite multiple attempts by numerically superior Japanese forces to overwhelm them." When relief finally arrived, only 8 of the 15 men remained unwounded. As stretcher-bearers evacuated their injured comrades, Davis overheard a Japanese prisoner speaking to a translator. The prisoner claims they were told to target the black Marines specifically, the translator explained to a white officer. They were ordered to make examples of them. The Japanese command believed breaking the black units would devastate American morale. Instead, the opposite had occurred. Word spread throughout the invasion force about the stand made by Davis and his comrades. The Japanese tactical error of specifically targeting black Marines had created an unexpected consequence, a fierce determination among those men to prove their worth. What began as a Japanese attempt to exploit racial divisions had instead forged a deadly resolve. On March 18, 1945, Admiral Chester Nimitz issued a commendation to the ammunition and depot companies serving on Iwo Jima. The citation noted exceptional bravery under fire and dedication to duty that exemplifies the highest traditions of the naval service. For the Montford Point Marines, it represented the first formal recognition of their combat contributions. By April of 1945, Nearly 2,000 Black Marines were deployed to Okinawa, the final stepping stone before an invasion of the Japanese home islands. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese forces had been specifically briefed about American racial divisions and instructed to focus psychological operations on exploiting these perceived weaknesses. As the battle for Okinawa intensified, captured Japanese documents revealed a fundamental misunderstanding that had persisted in their military doctrine. An order from a Japanese colonel to his troops stated, "The Americans send their Negro soldiers because they consider them expendable. These troops have low morale and will break under determined assault." This catastrophic misjudgment would lead Japanese commanders to direct resources toward attacking Black Marine units, believing they had identified an American vulnerability. Sergeant Wilkinson, now a seasoned combat veteran, led a detachment from the 18th Depot Company that was ambushed while delivering ammunition to an artillery position on May 12th. Pinned down by machine gun fire and surrounded by a Japanese platoon, Wilkinson organized a perimeter defense using supply crates for cover. For 7 hours, his 23 men repelled waves of attackers who seemed bizarrely determined to overrun this particular position while ignoring potentially easier targets nearby. A Japanese soldier captured after the battle explained through a translator, "We were told the Black Marines would break easily. Our officers said they were untrained and fearful." He appeared genuinely confused by what he had experienced, but they fought more fiercely than any Americans we had faced. As the Okinawa campaign continued into June of 1945, evidence mounted that Japanese forces were specifically targeting Black Marine units whenever they were identified. Far from exploiting a weakness, this strategy consistently backfired, as the Montford Point Marines responded with extraordinary determination. A Marine intelligence officer noted in his report, "The enemy has inadvertently created an elite fighting force through their misguided racial targeting." On June 21, 1945, the day before Okinawa was declared secured, a final bitter engagement occurred when a Japanese night infiltration unit attacked the bivouac area of the 20th Depot Company. In the chaotic pre-dawn darkness, 50 Japanese soldiers breached the perimeter, apparently following their standing orders to target Black Marine positions whenever possible. What followed was 3 hours of savage close-quarters combat. When reinforcements arrived at dawn, they found 37 dead Japanese soldiers and 8 killed Marines. The surviving Japanese prisoners appeared shocked at the resistance they had encountered. One officer, speaking through a translator, admitted, "We were told they would not fight hard because they were second class in their own military. We were told wrong." Following the victory on Okinawa, preparations began for the invasion of the Japanese home islands, an operation expected to cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August brought the war to an abrupt end before this invasion became necessary. With the Japanese surrender on September 2, 1945, a new phase began for the Black Marines who had served in the Pacific. As occupation forces moved into Japan in late 1945, military intelligence officers conducted comprehensive interviews with captured Japanese military leaders, seeking to understand their tactics and strategy. One recurring theme emerged regarding their approach to Black American troops. Major General Kiyoshi Yamashita admitted during questioning, "We believed America's racial problems were a military weakness we could exploit. We instructed our forces to focus on breaking Black units whenever possible. This was one of our most significant tactical errors in the Pacific campaign." The war's end brought an unexpected epilogue to the story of the Montford Point Marines. Several Japanese officers expressed curiosity about meeting the Black Marines they had unsuccessfully targeted throughout the Pacific campaign. In December of 1945, a formal meeting was arranged between former Japanese commanders and representatives from the Montford Point units serving in the occupation force. Captain Takeo Yoshikawa, who had once authored psychological warfare directives targeting black troops, bowed deeply before the assembled Marines. Through an interpreter, he said, "We believed America's racial divisions would make you weak soldiers. We were wrong. You were among the most determined enemies we faced." Upon returning to the United States in 1946, the Montford Point Marines faced a society largely unchanged in its racial attitudes. Despite their service, they encountered the same discrimination and segregation they had left behind. Jobs promised to returning veterans were often denied to black Marines. Public accommodations remained segregated. The country they had risked their lives to defend still treated them as second-class citizens. In an oral history recorded in 1967, former Sergeant Raymond Davis reflected on the irony of their situation. "The Japanese thought they could use America's racism against us in battle. They failed. But when we came home, that same racism was waiting for us, as powerful as ever. We defeated one enemy overseas, only to face another at home." The wartime records of the Montford Point Marines remained classified for decades after the war, their achievements largely forgotten by official histories that focused primarily on white combat units. Not until 1948 would President Truman issue Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the armed forces. Even then, full integration would take years to implement. The documents that revealed the Japanese strategy of targeting black Marines, specifically, remained buried in military archives until 1965, when historian Samuel Wilson uncovered them while researching psychological warfare tactics in the Pacific Theater. His paper, Racial Targeting in Japanese Military Strategy, finally brought to light the untold story of how Japanese forces had inadvertently strengthened the resolve of the very units they had sought to break. In 1968, during a ceremony marking the 20th anniversary of military desegregation, General Wallace Greene, then Commandant of the Marine Corps, acknowledged the debt owed to the Montford Point Marines. "These men faced enemies on two fronts, prejudice at home and a determined foe abroad. Their example of courage under the most difficult circumstances remains one of the proudest chapters in Marine Corps history." Decades later, survivors of the Montford Point Marines would share their stories with a new generation. Isaiah Montgomery, by then in his 80s, spoke to Marine recruits at Paris Island in 1988. "The Japanese thought our color made us weak. Our own military thought our color made us unsuitable for combat. We proved them both wrong, not with words, but with blood and sacrifice on the battlefield." In 2012, more than 60 years after their service, the Montford Point Marines were finally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their pioneering role in desegregating the Marine Corps. By then, fewer than 400 of the original 20,000 remained alive to receive the nation's highest civilian honor. At the ceremony, 90-year-old Raymond Davis remarked, "We changed the minds of the Japanese who thought we wouldn't fight. We changed the minds of white Marines who thought we couldn't fight. The only minds we couldn't change were the civilians back home who didn't want to know what we had done." The story of the Montford Point Marines represents a remarkable historical irony. An enemy's racial prejudice led them to target black Marines specifically, believing they had identified a weakness in the American forces. Instead, they inadvertently focused their attacks on men with extraordinary motivation to prove themselves, creating an unexpected cauldron of valor that forged some of the most determined fighting units in the Pacific Theater. The Japanese strategy of racial targeting, born from their own prejudices and misreading of American society, had precisely the opposite effect of what they intended. Rather than exploiting a vulnerability, they attacked where they found the greatest resolve. In doing so, they helped write a chapter of American military history that would otherwise have remained untold. The story of men who fought for a country that didn't fully accept them against an enemy that fundamentally misunderstood them. Today, as we examine this overlooked aspect of World War II history, we recognize not only the courage of these Marines in combat, but also their perseverance against the systemic racism they faced before, during, and after their service. Their legacy lives on in a Marine Corps that now celebrates the diversity they helped pioneer, even as their full story remained obscured for decades by the very prejudices they fought against. Did you find this story as remarkable as we did? Your support helps us continue producing these historical documentaries. A like, comment, or share makes an enormous difference. See more historical investigations on our channel, and if you haven't subscribed yet, join our community today. I'll see you in the next episode.